change the world? Are you gonna be the change, or are you gonna wait for change to rearrange you?
I love you.
I love my mommy and she loves me.
I had Dahlia 5 years ago, so she's 5 years old right now and was diagnosed with brain cancer when she was 2. So I went from having this dancing, affectionate, happy, playing 2-year-old baby girl to having this dying patient in a hospital bed overnight, literally. Dahlia's nightmare had just begun because while still intubated from that surgery, she was started on chemotherapy. And as a single mom, we had no life anymore. Everything disappeared. We lived solely to save Dahlia's life. I had no idea that from the time of diagnosis on that I would have literally no options. The very first surgery that she underwent, they literally told me that if I didn't agree to that surgery, they would do it without my permission. That if I did not agree to the conventional treatment options they were going to give me, which consist of surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, the state would take custody of her and she would undergo those treatments without me. These medical professionals are not evil. Their hands are tied. We have some really bad laws. Dahlia was prescribed some really harsh and dangerous drugs. Most of the medications come with side effects like psychosis, homicide, suicide, death, and that's all we have to offer these children. At some point, the shock started to wear off, and a few months into treatment, I realized that my daughter was going to die unless I did something about it. I looked up, over the course of just a few months, thousands of supplements and alternative treatments. What I found time and time again was that cannabis was very efficient just for treating the symptoms and side effects of both the disease and its treatment. So I let her medical professionals know that I was having cannabis shipped into an illegal state in Tennessee where St. Jude is, and we were all on board that it was none of our jobs to enforce laws. Our jobs was to enforce the well-being of this child. I started her on cannabis oil about 6 months into treatment. The very first night that she took oil, she slept through the night for the first time in her entire life. She gained 3 pounds the first week she was on oil. All of the science for or against in the world doesn't even matter. You're witnessing it with your own eyes. I was against drugs, and quite honestly, I didn't know the difference between one drug or another. I'm just so ashamed to admit. But had this been on a ballot in front of me, I don't think I would have voted for it. I also never had somebody sit down in front of me and explain to me that this was medicine. The healthcare system we see in America today, the fact that we have not a single cure for a single disease or illness that these children suffer from, that's all gonna be changed. And it's gonna be through the parents.
When my head hurts, my mommy puts medicine in my mouth, and then it makes my whole body feel better.
That's good.
The other medicines make me throw up.
Oh no, really?
Was there something in here once?
Yep, there was cancer in there.
And then what happened?
We killed the cancer.
Wow. You're so strong.
You said.
I said, don't come back, cancer.
And I like that. And I agree.
She seems like a really, really good mom, huh?
Mm-hmm. So she never gives up on her kid.
Whoa, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mommy, thank you, Mom.
Oh my God.
Alexis was 7.5 when fires hit. She was a previously normal, healthy child, walking around, talking, going to school. She had a fever for a couple of days, and Dad thought he heard something in the middle of the night and went and checked on her, and we found her having her first seizure. She was put in a medically induced coma for 4.5 months. Your body shouldn't be sleeping for that long.
And then when she came out?
Not the same kid. And she continues to seize. She has permanent brain damage now, and I know that a lot of it is from how long she was in a coma for. And the drugs, I mean, that's just poison. It's just poison, like constantly in you at all times. She's been on some pretty nasty, disgusting stuff. I think she's tried almost everything out there. Right now she's on 7, including a specialized diet that she's on. It's been just a constant for the last 3 years, just a constant trying to get these meds out of her. Just trying to get a little bit at a time, just lower it, because every time that we do, it's like a new kid. A little piece of her comes back. Every time that we take a little bit of those drugs away from her, she does amazing. When she left the hospital, she couldn't even hold her head up. Like, we literally had to stop while we were walking her in her wheelchair and fix her head for fear that it was just gonna snap. And now, I mean, she's got some serious arm strength. I didn't know that Alexis did understand what was going on around her until her dad and I were sitting on the couch one day, and I was telling him a pretty complicated, sad story. I mean, it was sad. Anybody that heard it would have cried. And I looked over at her. This is before she was saying anything. I looked over at her and she was crying. And that's when I knew that she completely understood what was going on. And I'm so grateful that that situation happened, because I don't know if we would have realized that she was trapped in there.
So she's trapped inside her body.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. And she's trapped on drugs, pharmaceuticals that are killing her brain.
Yes.
And killing her motor skills.
But maybe if she wasn't on so much medication and she did have the CBD oil, it would be a little easier. I believe that it would make our life a lot easier.
If it were legal, I definitely would be giving Alexis medical marijuana, CBD, whatever we could get our hands on. I mean, whatever to help her. I mean, it's natural. It's so much better than this garbage that she has to be on. I just wish that it wasn't so hard to get something that's just so natural. It's not fair. It's not fair.
She deserves it.
She's so amazing. She just needs to be back and have control. You don't know until you live this life. Until you are trapped in your own body, or you watching your daughter trapped. When she is in there and trying so hard to get out, you don't know. You don't know the pain and the misery that she has got to be in. I can tell. I mean, she has awesome days. She's having a pretty good day right now, but there's days that she's miserable, and we're miserable, and it's not fair. It wouldn't harm anybody else.
Awesome, Lex. Wow. Oh my God.
with T-cell ALL, which is quite more aggressive than your normal PB leukemia. She went into surgery right away. We started chemotherapy, 12 different kinds. Within the first week, she could not hold her head up. She couldn't hold her head up. She couldn't hold her own cup. A week before this, she was just a normal little girl, running around, playing, and now, she literally can't do anything but lay in the bed. And they said, you know what, this is normal. This is what chemotherapy does. We did have a sit down with her doctor, and we asked, what are our other options? We were told, if you don't do this, your daughter will die in 2 weeks. That's what we were told. I didn't know at the time that in the United States, if you have a child diagnosed with cancer and you don't do chemotherapy, they will call CPS and they'll take your kid away. They'll put you in jail, and then your kid will still go through chemotherapy.
It's a pretty barbaric treatment. Technically, chemotherapy is a poison. The original chemotherapy drug was a derivative of mustard gas.
I was a prohibitionist. Not only was I a prohibitionist, but I was the mom and the person that would and did call the police on my children's friends because they were smoking pot in my house. Now I'm an activist, and I'd like to tell you why. About 8 years ago, my son started having seizures out of nowhere. From there, it progressed to where he was having 1 or 2 seizures a day, to, at his worst point, he was having 500 to 700 seizures a day. We tried every kind of medication that we could that existed. Living with epilepsy is a day-to-day terror. And while my son was going through this, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. So not only was I dealing with what my son was going through, but I was going through chemo and radiation. At this time, I was still a prohibitionist. And did everything for myself that the doctors told me to also. So I began chemo and radiation. I had surgery.
How much money does chemotherapy make? Do you know?
It's $1 billion industry.
Unlike other kinds of doctors, physicians who treat cancer are allowed to profit from the sale of chemotherapy drugs.
And continued seeing my son get worse and worse, and didn't know what to do. They would give him medications that would make him violent, and violent to the point that he would throw a dog out the window. I asked him to let the dog out one day, and he threw her out the window and broke her leg. And when I called the doctor and asked him why, he said, "This is normal." And I even had a moment where one of his neurologists asked me about, had I ever thought about pot? Again, I was a prohibitionist. And my immediate response was, absolutely not. I've spent my entire life teaching my children that drugs are bad.
You're raised to think weed kills your brain cells, and you're raised to think that it's bad. When I first started learning about it, I did think that it was, probably not the smartest thing to do, but I was so uneducated. It actually protects your brain cells.
So when I was about 18 and a half years old, we found out that my father had passed away very suddenly of liver cancer. I wanted to figure out maybe how we could prevent that, if not obviously for him, but maybe for other people's loved ones. One of the only things that I found a number of years later was CBD, or a cannabinoid that is found in marijuana and also hemp. Now, there's no guarantees that obviously would have saved my dad's life, but I think that if the science were valid and if it were integrated at a national level, then obviously we probably would have heard a little bit more about it in the media. Maybe at school we would be taught about it, and maybe, my father could have been aware of it a little bit earlier.
And that day at work, my son started to seize again, and one of my friends that had been talking to me about it asked me to try it. And I just had this moment of sheer terror because I was afraid I was going to lose my son. So I broke down and decided to do it. And we tried it on him, and for the first time ever, his seizure stopped instantly. So that's where my cannabis journey began. I really struggled because I'd always heard in church that, pot is still a drug, it's bad. And so even though we had heard the different things and saw what it was doing for my son and saw what it was doing for me, I had a moment of, am I going to save myself and then go to hell? And that I was worried. Somebody told me that it's actually in the Bible. So we sat down in the store and found out that it's actually in the Bible over 60 times as a type of a healing substance. And that's something that's not really well known. And I've talked to a couple of pastors about it, and they've supported that. Fast forward to May of 2017, I'm 100% cancer-free. Mind you, I did not have any chemo or radiation going back to November of 2014. All that I've used was Rick Simpson oil and cannabis in other forms. And then my son, in the time that we've been using cannabis, has gone from having that 500 to 700 seizures a day to not using any pharmaceuticals. And now he is only having 1 or 2 seizures every few months.
When you have something so powerful that can, not only help with the side effects and the symptoms, it actually kills cancer cells.
Yes.
Period. Why is it not legal?
Yeah. The fact that it's illegal is insane to me.
It is insane.
The scientific evidence that already exists and is acknowledged at a federal level in even something like the 507 patent on CBD, which was submitted by the National Institute of Health, they even say in that patent, even with chronic usage, repeated chronic usage of CBD, there were no known or demonstrated negative side effects. There were very few, if not any, contraindications with actual medication. It actually lists cancers in quite a great degree, and it expresses that it feels that it could perhaps treat and prevent even a number of cancers, which was amazing to me because here this is a federally illegal substance. It's not something that is talked about at all, and yet it looks as if there's enough scientific evidence for the government at least to patent it.
My husband, he is a disabled veteran, a young man, and a good father. He has PTSD for serving in the U.S. Army. Has so many different ailments that he has 12 different medications, and most of them are to counteract the side effects from things that are being treated.
Go talk to every one of those guys that go into boot camp. They come out of that thing, they're all getting tanked. And when they go overseas, what do? It's an easy one. They can go to the doctor, they can say, hey, look, doc, my nerves are shot, or I can't sleep, or I can't do this. You know what the average cocktail is for sleep in the military? They don't even want to take a guess. But these guys go through an awful lot. Sleep deprivation, let's just call it stress and anxiety levels, cause them always to go towards maybe a medication. And it starts with a small thing. It could start with just alcohol one time. And it goes all the ways up to opiates, where these guys are killing themselves because they're on a cocktail that'll make them psychotic. So what's better? A plant-based thing that's 100% natural? Or, I don't know, go take a cocktail that you're gonna go shoot your brains out with. See, even the dog agrees.
I encouraged him to look at medical marijuana as an avenue for treating. And because he comes from a conservative background, a good family, Lutheran churchgoers, it was hard to convince him until he tried it, and it was life-changing.
There's an awful lot of hurting people out there where I don't care what your position is on cannabis. If you see what it does to the people, then you're going to change your mind. If you don't see it and you put your head in the sand, you might as well just go eat more Oxycontin.
My husband of 37 years, he died 4 months ago. And he had brain damage from playing football. He was diagnosed with dementia. He could not talk, he could not communicate. He was hitting the walls and the windows. He was so afraid of everyone. As soon as I found this product, this Colorado cannabis oil, it really changed his life, his quality of life until he died. I mean, it was like night and day. He smiled, he was trying to talk. It was just a miracle. And I truly hope people will listen and try it as an alternative for their loved ones.
I was a former professional football player. Everything coming out right now as far as head trauma with CTE in football really puts a giant question mark on the health of my brain, and ultimately I have a higher than likely chance in my lifetime. So ultimately having my brain start to die, if cannabis can do anything to combat that, we should definitely, research it. I have a friend that I talk to all the time, a former professional football player, and I'll read the text message for you right now. I feel like shit every day. lately I've been thinking about suicide. So, you know, when I receive a text message like that, it starts to hit home, because there are people suffering every single day that, you know, have spent their life, say, playing a sport or in the military, and they have issues that cannabis can help with. So we need to start to explore that. We need to do research studies.
I came back to football after a year off.
A 28-yard burst and sprint by Ricky Williams.
And now I'm an advocate. One, because I truly believe that cannabis helped me play football for 11 years. And I also look at how my life was almost ruined because I failed a drug test for cannabis. I'm advocating so people don't have to experience what I experienced for taking care of themselves and doing what's right.
You know, the NFL drowns in pain pills. It's the grease that keeps the league running. This is the most frightening epidemic I've seen probably since the methamphetamine epidemic beginning in the early 90s.
Well, right now I'm most interested in pain relief for me personally and the people I'm closest with, my former teammates. I just see far too many of us suffering.
I spend a lot of time now advocating, so I've gone from being a huge prohibitionist to now I'm an activist and trying to educate and teach people like me and help open up their minds so they don't go through what my family went through. I think it should be a first choice, not a last option. It should be something that our doctors discuss with us from the get-go and allow us to make that choice. Everybody should have a choice, because had I done what I was told, I wouldn't be here.
Now I'm such a big advocate. I talk to people all the time, from legislators locally and on a government level. I also talk to PTA moms, neighbors. I share as much information as I can, and I encourage them to seek their own answers because there is new science that's coming out daily.
Awareness is when you get up in front of somebody and you tell somebody in Congress to say, hey, why don't you change the programs? Why don't you let vets actually access cannabis at a VA or even at a Veterans of Foreign War? You know, a guy that goes out today, gets shot at, comes back to the United States, he can't go to a VFW where everybody's drinking dollar beers and getting their liver toxified. They can't even take a bit of cannabis because they can't use it there. They can't even get their benefits if they have cannabis in their system.
It's so interesting that so many people have been helped by cannabis, and the results or the testimonials, we would call it in the science world, anecdotal evidence, is becoming so profound that there's this groundswell throughout the nation. And there are people that are standing up, and there are protests and rallies. So here you have this super powerful plant medicine. It's affecting things neurologically, it's affecting our immune systems, it's helping our liver, it's helping our autoimmune systems and our responses, and yet there's almost no negative side effects. Cannabis really just became this tipping point for an entire other world of plant-based medicines, healing medicines that help us as a species and ultimately our planet.
We woke up to take the kids to school like we did every day. Chris had noticed there's a lot of police out today. They followed us over 8 miles. We got up to a four-way stop. It was a big intersection. I was pulled out by my hair backwards by police officers. One man, he grabbed my daughter inside, leaning in my vehicle with a big gun. And he grabbed her shoulders and started pushing them with the guns in the kids' faces. And they took me and my kids to the sheriff's department, and we sat there together. My kids had to sit there for over 6 hours. We had a business, we had an attorney telling us what to do. So as far as we knew, we were following the laws. We were doing what Arizona said that we needed to do. Me and Chris met when I was 15, and we've been together now 13 years. We've never been apart, so this is a shock. The kids have never been away from him. We've always done everything as a family. I want to legalize cannabis. We aren't the only family this has happened to. My kids aren't the only kids that have been tortured or scared by this. We're not the only ones, and the more people can see that there are so many of us, it's not okay. And I think people need to see the severity of what's really happening over a plant, over something that's saving people.
And that's why we produce our show. It's why we educate and advocate to legalize cannabis.
How you gonna change the world? Are you gonna be the changer? Are you gonna wait for change to rearrange you?
1, 2, 3, 4. Exposing all our loves are true. Feel the many scars on a fast highway. I love you from afar. I walked away. Mean it wasn't hard. You can't keep your heart intact. You can't keep it safe. I can't keep your heart as black. It turns the other way. Fumbling in a darkness. What used to give me joy. The feeling of this love is like a broken baby toy. They're choking on your own heart twice. I'm not here to tell you what to do or give advice on matters of the heart and what a sacrifice. Your point of view is shallow, it just seems so imprecise. It seems so imprecise. You can't keep your heart intact, you can't keep it safe. I can't keep your heart as black, it turns the other way. Fumbling in the darkness, what used to give me joy. The feeling of this love is like a broken baby toy. Last chorus. Thanks, everybody.